Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this panel dedicated to the Virunga National Park, part of the European Development Days 2021 event. My name's Phil Gale, I'll be your host and moderator. Over the course of the next hour, you will hear from and have a chance to put your questions to our guest speakers. Jutta Urpilainen is the EU's Commissioner for International Partnerships. Eve Bazaiba is Vice Prime Minister and Minister for the Environment and Sustainable Development of the Democratic Republic of Congo. Ben Affleck is co-founder and chair of the Eastern Congo Initiative, and Emmanuel de Merode is director of the Virunga National Park. Well, the national park is in the Democratic of Congo and is one of the planet's precious resources, rich in biodiversity and home to iconic endangered species like mountain gorillas, elephants, and forest giraffes. But it's also in one of the world's most fragile regions, inside a country at the epicenter of bloody conflicts over resources, from minerals like cobalt, diamonds, and copper, to timber and oil. So how do you combine nature conservation with economic development? How do you create jobs without disturbing or destroying such valuable ecosystems and habitats? Well, you have to work with people, with local people and partner organizations. The Virunga Alliance proposes to create such partnerships, combining nature conservation with access to electricity, jobs, development of supply chains, and better livelihoods. So over the course of the next hour, we will learn about the European Union's involvement in the DRC, in the park, and in local communities. And the EU's clean energy projects are particularly important because when you have affordable, reliable power, suddenly so much more is possible. You'll also hear about the Eastern Congo Initiative's successful efforts to add value locally to products like cocoa and sustainable palm oil, instead of those same raw materials having to be sold cheaply and exported, and then the processed goods bought back at inflated prices. And this is good business, attracting the attention of multinationals like Starbucks and Nespresso. But it's business on terms that more directly benefit local communities sustainably for the long term. And in this way, it's hoped that Virunga National Park can become a model for other projects, creating partnerships to conserve nature and provide clean energy and jobs. Now, before I invite our first guest to speak, let me remind you that you can comment and put your questions to our speakers using the box on the right of your screen. Our first panellist is the European Union's Commissioner for International Partnerships, Jutta Urpilainen. Welcome, Commissioner. Could you please tell us about the EU's engagement in the region and how green development and biodiversity protection can help lift northern Kivu out of the current cycle of violence and poverty?
Thank you very much. And it's a pleasure to participate in this important event today with you, and greetings from Brussels. According to the International Union for Conservation of Nature, over 25% of mammals and 40% of amphibians are threatened by extinction. So we really need to act now. The EU is committed to raise our funds for biodiversity to 10% by the year 2026. 30% of our European budget will also be dedicated to climate action objectives. Virunga National Park is of course famous for its spectacular landscapes, astonishing biodiversity, including its famous mountain gorillas. But it is also known for its people. 4 million who are amongst the youngest and most vulnerable in the country. Virunga National Park is an example in that it protects nature, but also people. And this is how we want to engage with our partners. I would like to take this opportunity in the presence of Vice Prime Minister Bazaiba to comment the DRC for its vision. By combining nature protection, tourism, health, education, hydroelectric and water infrastructure development, the Virunga Alliance improves the livelihoods of the local communities. Investing in green value chain, such as coffee, chocolate, and soap, ensures economic resilience. And we want our investments in the green economy to have a direct impact on local people. Electrification is, of course, essential for economic development, and this is actually why the EU reacted very quickly to support the DRC following the recent Nyiragongo volcanic eruption. Together we ensured the households, businesses, water pumps, and 2 main hospitals were reconnected. Today, I am not only ensuring you from our commitment to Virunga, but telling you that we are stepping up our contribution. So if you allow me, I have an announcement to make. Virunga already supplies 70% of Goma's electricity. Now, the EU is scaling up assistance by investing additional 20 million euros in the new power plant in Nyiragongo. This will add another 15 megawatts of electricity for Goma and help children to pursue their education, but also to support businesses and job creation. The Virunga experiment shows that improving livelihoods through nature protection and investing in green economy, it really works. So with these remarks, I'm really looking forward to our discussions.
Thank you so much, Commissioner. That's an important announcement. An additional 20 million euros into a new power plant in Nyiragongo. So perhaps now is an appropriate time to bring in our next speaker, Vice Prime Minister of the Democratic Republic of Congo, Eve Bazaibo. Welcome. Your country contains some of the world's richest biodiversity, a true jewel, but you also face many challenges: poverty, security, and a young population that wants a better future. So how will the DRC work with partners to develop those economic opportunities?
De quelle façon le RDC travaille avec ses partenaires pour obtenir ces investissements?
Oui, merci beaucoup.
Il y a un écho dans le micro.
Merci beaucoup, mesdames et messieurs, à vos titres et qualités respectifs. J'aimerais faire une brève présentation de la situation de la République démocratique du Congo, essentiellement dans la gestion de nos aires protégées, et surtout parler de la collaboration que nous avons actuellement avec les partenaires. Mais au nom du gouvernement congolais, je voudrais d'abord commencer par remercier tous les partenaires, partout où ils sont, pour leur compassion par rapport à la situation qui nous a frappés depuis le 22 mai dernier sur l'éruption volcanique. Et jusqu'à présent, nous continuons à gérer des effets collatéraux. Mesdames et messieurs, l'honneur me choix de participer aujourd'hui à la 14e édition des Journées européennes, ce grand rendez-vous international qui, cette année, se penchera sur la question du pacte vert pour un environnement durable, avec bien entendu un focus sur les modèles de gestion mis en place dans le parc national de Virunga par la République démocratique du Congo et l'Union européenne, qui prône une gestion de la nature au service des populations et d'une économie verte. Comme vous le savez certainement, le parc national de Virunga a été créé depuis 1925 dans le but non seulement de protéger des tiers des gorilles, des montagnes restant sur la planète, ou des milliers d'espèces de mammifères, oiseaux, reptiles et amphibiens qui y pullulent, mais également assurer un avenir meilleur à des millions d'êtres humains qui y vivent et en prenant soin de leur richesse depuis des millénaires. C'est ici l'occasion pour moi de saluer sincèrement les sacrifices consentis par l'Union européenne, nos partenaires porteurs des projets dans le parc de Virunga, qui nous accompagnent dans la mise en œuvre des politiques environnementales sur la gestion de nos ressources naturelles, forestières, y compris les ressources en eau et autres. Ces politiques, en effet, ont pour base fondamentale le bien-être des populations autochtones et des riverains dans le milieu que nous appelons les aires protégées. Ces politiques traduisent la volonté du gouvernement de la République de s'aligner sur les standards internationaux de gestion durable des ressources naturelles sans s'écarter de la recherche des meilleures conditions de vie pour les communautés locales dont les forêts ont été transformées en aires protégées par la loi. Virunga est certes ce que nous appelons des success stories que la République démocratique du Congo est heureuse de partager avec le monde. Mais c'est le cas dans toutes les œuvres humaines. Il y a certainement des améliorations qui nécessitent ici et là. C'est dans ce sens de concilier davantage la gestion des parcs aux intérêts des légitimes populations locales. Dans l'entendement de la RDC, mon pays, l'économie verte restera un vain slogan en absence d'une prise en compte effective des préoccupations des populations locales dont les forêts ont été transformées en aires protégées. Cette question est très préoccupante, d'autant plus que les enjeux climatiques actuels et futurs exigent de plus en plus de sacrifices des populations riveraines des aires protégées qui devront consentir des sacrifices à concéder à autrui certaines de leurs prérogatives traditionnelles sur l'environnement. Parce que l'environnement, les forêts, les eaux, pour les Africains, pour les Congolais, c'est une richesse et c'est aussi une dévotion qu'on leur accorde. En incluant les partenaires traditionnels dans cette vision, spécialement l'Union européenne et l'initiative pour les forêts d'Afrique centrale, le CAFI, mon pays sera capable de fournir au monde ce que le monde entend de lui sur le plan forestier. En cela, pour la République démocratique du Congo, les ressources forestières, un audit sera mené et conduira à une revue légale des titres de concession forestière agréés, ce qui semble être la ligne certainement du 11e Fonds européen de développement en sigle FED. Il s'agit de prévoir la thématique environnement dans les activités portant sur la légalité des bois, sur la gestion des aires protégées. Notre objectif est ici, premièrement, d'identifier les concessions ne remplissant pas les prescriptions légales en vigueur. Et deuxièmement, de prendre des mesures urgentes touchant jusqu'à l'exploitation artisanale afin de promouvoir un modèle d'exploitation durable de nos ressources forestières. Il faut également signaler la tenue des états généraux des forêts et des eaux et aussi les objectifs d'élargissement des aires protégées que nous allons procéder très bientôt par rapport à nos assignations. Cette politique alignera aussi la sensibilisation des communautés nationales comme l'un des vecteurs essentiels dans le processus national des passages à l'économie verte. Mesdames et messieurs, l'expérience du parc national de Virunga a démontré que les populations riveraines ne constituent pas une menace en soi à l'intégrité écologique des aires protégées et à leur biodiversité. Même s'il faut prendre en compte leur accroissement démographique, la menace au parc de Virunga provient des occupants illégaux, notamment les groupes armés incontrôlés actuellement, les ADF Nalu, les FDLR, les anciennement appelés Interahamwe, bref, des rebelles des pays voisins qui sont venus s'ériger, transformer le parc de Virunga en sanctuaire d'insécurité. Ils se livrent allègrement à des activités prohibées comme le braconnage et l'exploitation des ressources naturelles et commettent de diverses exactions contre les populations locales. Que les efforts de futur les efforts futurs de nos partenaires présents à Virunga soient axés, serait important, sur la fin de l'insécurité qui y règne et qui détruit son environnement. Ces efforts devraient également protéger les populations riveraines du parc vis-à-vis de cette insécurité. Les populations riveraines aux aires protégées ne doivent plus être regardées comme un problème, mais plutôt comme faisant partie de la solution aux problèmes des parcs où ils vivent. Que les communautés locales soient bénéficiaires des programmes classiques comme nous l'avons vu actuellement sur les programmes de développement avec la construction de centrales hydroélectriques, mais aussi il est important de mettre un accent sur l'éducation et des programmes spécifiques de l'environnement pour en faire des acteurs clés de développement durable et la mise en place d'une économie verte. Alors que le monde entier a des yeux fixés sur la République démocratique du Congo et ses ressources forestières pour donner à l'humanité l'oxygène nécessaire pour sa survie, je lance un vibrant appel à nos partenaires de l'Union européenne présentement et à tous les partenaires dans le Virunga, spécialement à la Fondation Virunga, pour une plus grande unité d'action et de coordination en vue de parvenir à une gestion durable de notre environnement et à la restauration de nos écosystèmes, à la valorisation aussi de nos ressources naturelles, forestières en eau, etc. Une fois cela réalisé, ça sera un grand pas en avant vers la manière de sceller et de concrétiser le pacte vert pour un avenir durable. Mesdames et messieurs, la République démocratique du Congo demeure ouverte à collaborer, à coopérer pour la protection des aires protégées, mais aussi pour tenir compte des communautés envoisinantes. Je vous remercie.
Madam Vice Prime Minister, thank you so much for that. There's quite a lot to get through there. I'm sure we will discuss much of it. But for now, thank you so much for confirming your country's engagement with this project. Our next speaker is Mr. Ben Affleck, who is co-founder and chair of the Eastern Congo Initiative. The ECI is an advocacy and grant-making initiative providing opportunities for economic and social development with and for the people of Eastern Congo. Welcome, Ben. Could you tell us more about the ECI and about the lessons you've learned as the initiative has progressed?
Sure. First of all, I'd like to thank you for having me. It's an honor to be on the same panel with such esteemed guests. And if you'll forgive me, I'll give you a rather circuitous description of how it is I ended up becoming familiar with the Virunga National Park, with Emmanuel's work, with Congo in general, and coming to believe many of the things that the previous speaker just said, particularly the importance, the vital importance of local groups in development, sustainability, and prosperity. And certainly, I have nothing less than, an extraordinary respect for Emmanuel, his work, his dedication, his commitment, the enormous sacrifices given by his rangers at the park, and his dedication and the value that the park is to the country, having had the honor of visiting and meeting with him several times. To start with how I sort of got there, at a certain point in my life, it became clear I wanted to do something, to try to repay in some small measure at least the good fortune that I'd had in my life. Although the biggest fear I had was that I would, get it wrong. And I got a lot of things wrong on the way. But what I got right was one critical thing, although probably I got that right by accident. What I got right was I started by wanting to learn, wanting to listen. I started really from a basic fundamental approach of complete humility. And because I was so afraid of being this sort of dilettante celebrity doing photo shoots in hospitals and getting back to my life of luxury, I really just had a fear of humiliation, instinct that the only real wisdom was in humility before I wanted to try to do anything I wanted to learn. And having, over the course of the last 10 years, since we've set up ECI, I've been back and forth to the DRC more than 15 times. But before I'd ever been there, I'd heard it mentioned, and really only briefly and only in passing, casual reference to the millions who had died as a direct or indirect result of war, the ongoing instability, and the suffering there. But perhaps what most moved me was that I had never heard of it before. And when I did hear about it, I was told by experts, by philanthropists, by NGOs at the time that it was really too unstable to even operate or work there, and that many of the people working in NGOs doing important work and helpful work in those places had more or less written DRC off, and that inspired me. So I decided to start learning. I started traveling and using the privilege that I had as an actor to arrange and meet people to learn, and most importantly to listen. And I had the chance to meet with presidents and governors and professors and writers and CEOs of NGOs, but even more useful, more telling, more illustrative, really, were the people you didn't need to be anybody to get a chance to meet. The Congolese people living in their communities, striving to make a life for themselves, often amid chaos and misery, and sometimes simply under the weight of grinding poverty. But they were working harder and with deeper, more powerful spirits and dedication than anyone I'd ever come across. And I was, frankly, just astounded. And so I wanted to hear what they had to say. How could they maintain this spirit of hope, this diligence, this determination, this optimism, even in the face of what many of us, probably on this Zoom, would imagine were unimaginable and insurmountable odds. I listened to rape survivors and nurses who treated them. I spoke to rapists in prisons to understand how they could violate the common pact of humanity so brazenly. I spoke to soldiers, to IDPs, to volunteers, to the UN, people at every level within the UN, to child soldiers, to park rangers, to a prince running a national park, to boat captains, to journalists. And to my great surprise, and I'm embarrassed now to admit this, because in retrospect it seems so painfully obvious. When I looked around, when I really listened, when I simply made just a 2-year plan to meet and learn from every person I possibly could in Eastern Congo before I did anything, what I saw was that, and I say this with the most respect and appreciation for who I imagine are the many dedicated philanthropists in the room and listening to this. But the truth is, from my point of view, the most effective, extraordinary, expert philanthropy was not being practiced by the great minds atop great wealth sitting a great distance away, but by the Congolese themselves, whose intimate knowledge and experience of their own community made them far more expert than any NGO could possibly be, who came along, imposed a model, doled out goods from white trucks for a while, and then disappeared. Things got too hairy, their donors got fatigued, or if their strategy changed. So I began to understand why the Congolese had a profound cynicism, not about themselves and their prospects. They're extraordinarily optimistic in that regard, but cynicism about the international community and the philanthropic community. From the ground, from within Congo, from their point of view, both appeared mercurial, constantly shifting strategies, the principal effect of which the Congolese experience was that one day people just stopped showing up in one place and started showing up in another, from their point of view, almost arbitrarily. And that so many NGOs who talked to me at such length about the money invested in Congo were in fact really only investing a small fraction of that money in the country and the people itself, but mostly investing in paying Europeans and North Americans to run experience, dole out goods, make PowerPoint slides, and then return home was the money they'd earned when they, became burned out, exhausted after a year or two. So I began to see what it was that, if anything, I had to offer, and what mistakes I vowed I would not make. And I became convinced through personal exposure that there were hundreds of community-based organizations in Congo, run by the Congolese, operated by the Congolese with great efficiency and efficacy, and that they were honest, they were reliable, and in fact doing the best effective work in the places where it was most needed, because they understood the communities, because they had relationships with the people in the communities, because they understood the dynamics, both the power dynamics, the social dynamics, the root causes of so much of the conflict. And because no one really believed us when we went back and told people this, we partnered with the Harvard Humanitarian Institute and 6 Congolese organizations to launch a research program. We interviewed, I think, 535 people who told us what the impact of the war was on them and their families and how they could be better supported. And at the very root of the study, perhaps the most important aspect in some ways was simply demonstrating how many incredible organizations already existed and how they desperately needed the access to support that international NGOs had, and often could make a euro go a lot farther and do a lot more with it. So we decided to partner with these community-based groups and have subsequently directly funded more than 40 of them and dispersing tens of millions of dollars, both directly and indirectly. We worked with the donor community to communicate the reality of what we'd seen, and we encouraged them in supporting us, supporting the Congolese in the most direct and effective way possible. After 4 or 5 years of what felt like sort of staunching wounds, it was clear that any real work that was going to create a viable, sustainable, prosperous future had to include assisting the rebuilding of a society, recovering and reeling from a war, which 8 other countries had been present in their national borders, fighting over their resources, and where instability continued to plague regions, as we've already heard discussed. To assist them to rebuild a society to prevent further violence and tragedy. So once again, we went back and we listened to child soldiers, to the abducted, to rebel groups, warlords themselves. We met with many of the people just mentioned, FDLR, foreign-based rebel groups, soldiers themselves, the civilians who lived trying to simply make a living for themselves in regions where this fighting was taking place, often finding themselves victims of proxy forces fighting at the behest of larger forces from outside the region, and they themselves the ones who paid the principal price. And one of the really important things that we discovered, and this brings me to how we came to converge in some ways with the goals, and I don't liken myself certainly to Emmanuel, for whom I have as much regard as a person can have for another, in terms of his own dedication, intelligence. It's the fact that Virunga provides 80% of the electricity to Goma. The reason why they were able to electrify the city during the recent tragedy. The list of reasons why I admire what's being done in Virunga is too long for me to extol here, and I would probably put you all to sleep eventually. But what we saw was the role commodities like coffee and cacao played in funding these rebel groups, and that by supporting communities who farmed these products and in helping them access higher paying international markets, we could help create more prosperous livelihoods. And that was something that we were able to do, to bring our relationships with these international organizations to bear, to help the Congolese who had long farmed coffee and cacao, long before these companies came along, to do so in a way that was compatible with the demands of these international buyers, and to demonstrate the superior quality of their product, and to simply act as facilitators and capacity builders and support these farmers already present so that they could become more stable and more prosperous, so that they could have better livelihoods and create more stable villages and brighter future rooted in the energy and dedication we already knew had seen was alive and present in an extraordinary way in the Congolese themselves. So we brought in friends and partners like Starbucks and Theo Chocolates and Nespresso. They invested in farms and farming communities and created a supply and stimulated demand for high-end Congolese coffee and chocolate, which once you try it is a demand not too difficult to stimulate, in fact. And the farmers we worked with exported over 5,400 tons of cacao, while raising farmers' incomes by more than 300%, so tripled incomes, increased washing stations eightfold, exported 254 tons of coffee a year, doubled those coffee farmers' incomes, and found that the results, the contagion of success and prosperity, rooted in the work of the Congolese themselves, in which they justifiably took enormous pride and from which they drew enormous esteem, and which assisted in ameliorating a sense of hopelessness, the kind that sometimes allows one to give way to the pressure, temptation of participating in destabilizing activities. Rather, we tried to help foster the creation of a more appealing way of life by helping to generate that, or helping people who were generating that themselves. And the next step came from one particularly astonishing community operated organization. And what we heard when we listened to them, we heard that people really, this really should be no surprise, but it was extraordinary how profound this realization was. People in Congo, like anywhere else, wanted dignity, self-respect, wanted to be treated with respect, whether or not they were grantees, or whether or not they were enjoying what others viewed as their largesse. They were human beings who deserved at least as much respect and admiration as any other human being from any other place. And basically, what we did was we acquired a community design social enterprise called the Silly to bring clean water and healthcare. And as we acquired a Silly and brought in our partners like Starbucks and Nespresso. Nespresso is buying their world-class coffee in Congo. They're also investing in the Silly to bring clean water and healthcare to farming families. That support enables us to serve 80,000 people, not for the period of a grant, but for a generation. And because of the revolutionary model that asks donors for a one-time commitment to start a clinic or a water station, and that allows it to operate more like a business than a traditional philanthropy, it can be ongoing. And does not rely on the perpetual ability to raise money. So the mostly women and children who come to the clinics are treated with the dignity of a customer, rather than what can sometimes feel like the ignominy of one getting a handout and the uncertainty that it'll be there the next day. In the end, for us, it's about humility. It's about listening and respecting those, who one seeks to assist, and the fundamental recognition of our common humanity, so we can realize the story.
Sound like you've been on quite the journey there, Ben. Thank you so much for sharing that experience with us. And to our audience, please remember you can post your questions to our panelists using the box on the right-hand side of the screen. So let's bring in one of the people for whom we have so much respect, Emmanuel de Merode, who's director of the Virunga National Park. Welcome, Emmanuel. The park looks like it must be an incredible place to work, although quite complex. Perhaps you could tell us about its current situation and the opportunities you see for the future.
Well, thank you ever so much. I mean, it's as Ben said, but in particular for me, it's a huge privilege to be here and to be on this panel. Of course, my world is much smaller, but I think in a sense it's the example it gives in terms of the challenges that we're confronted with, and the way that the teams and the communities around us have sought to resolve these problems, that are a real reflection of many of the bigger challenges that our global society are faced with today. And so, of course, we always start with Virunga National Park, because that's certainly what brought me here, this extraordinary national park that is, perhaps the greatest national park on Earth in many ways. It's the park that has the greatest number of species of birds, reptiles, mammals. It's the only park on Earth that has mountain gorillas, lowland gorillas, chimpanzees, 3 taxa of 3 types of great apes, and these extraordinary landscapes. But what we don't talk about so much is the other side of the medal, which is a much more difficult, much more challenging landscape to deal with, which is, of course, the fact that Virunga is above all a very human landscape. We have 5 million people who live within a day's walk of the park's boundary. And really here, I'd like to try and sort of capture, many of the challenge that's really been set by Her Excellency, Madam Deputy Prime Minister, was to really, of course, fulfill that commitment to preserve this extraordinary landscape, these extraordinary ecosystems and their species. But alongside that, understand this other dimension. And the reason for that is that Virunga is really nested within a region of the world that has seen one of the greatest tragedies in modern history, which is 30 years of violence, 30 years of armed conflict, interspersed with intense periods of civil war. That together is considered to be the cause for the death of over 8 million Congolese people, people who have died through no fault of their own, who are innocent to the underlying causes of that conflict. And it really compels us all, and it's really what has brought us together with the Congolese government and its institutions, the European Union, and very, very unusual, very particular organizations and people like the Eastern Congo Initiative, to focus all of our efforts not on this traditional approach to protected area management conservation, but to trying to understand the causes of extreme suffering, of extreme poverty and violence. And of course, in tackling that approach, we came to realize that really it's the fundamental issue. It's to do with a principle of social justice. And in many ways, it's no coincidence that Virunga National Park lies at the heart of this region, and that it could be said that almost every war happened in Eastern Congo, the succession of terrible wars, has started either within or immediately around Virunga National Park. What that does is that it forces us to develop a strategy that really attempts to understand what it is that causes violence, and how to mitigate those effects. And that's what really created this convergence of strategies around this one issue. And of course, what we realize is that, once protected area managers, wildlife managers like myself, really focused on protecting wildlife, that has now evolved into an issue that is really about addressing the much wider human issues around the national park. And so really there were two approaches. The first was to embrace this comment made by Madam Deputy Prime Minister, which was that really the sacrifice of the Congolese people and of the Congolese state really needs to be articulated. One way of defining it is the setting aside of huge tracts of land for conservation deprives local people of access to that land. That can be estimated at a cost of $1 billion a year of lost income for the local people. There is equally the cost of the human cost of protecting that landscape. Virunga's team of rangers, Congolese conservation professionals, have lost 200 of their own in the last 30 years since the period of violence began protecting this national park. The sacrifice and the effort of the Congolese people to preserve what is now fully understood and enshrined in international law to be an international public good, something that is there for the benefit of the whole of humanity, also has a cost. And that cost is almost entirely being borne by the people who live around the national park and who can least afford it. And so that's really where we're so grateful for the substantive and exceptional support over such a long period of the European Union to try and redress that imbalance. And of course, it's not just about benefits. And I think that's really where Ben's words are so poignant. It's about empowerment. We're not talking about just trying to derive as many benefits as we can from a national park as handouts to local people, but rather turn this national park into something that's going to drive the economy, and an economy that is controlled by local groups and local people. And so how did that happen? How did we articulate that strategy and materialize it into something that was real? Really at two levels. One was to really understand the underlying dynamics of violence and try and identify an alternative through local groups that could provide an alternative economic model. And at the heart of that is the issue of energy. The history of Congo is one of the extraction of natural resources, often through coercive, violent measures, and its export from the country in its raw form. What we need to do is bring that back to Congo, what the Congolese community needs to do, and its entrepreneurs and its civil society groups, is to regain control of those resources and retain all of the added value to be able to do that. But to achieve that, we need energy. It's that drives local industry, the whole transformation of Congo's resources. And that, of course, is what Virunga National Park can provide. So we were able to do a study in 2010 that established that Virunga National Park could create 105 megawatts of energy. That is 32 times what that province, a province that is twice the size of Belgium, has the same population as Belgium. This one national park could increase its energy available 32 times. Today we're now at 30% of that target. Clean hydroelectric energy is being generated from the park's rivers to generate about 30 megawatts. This extraordinary announcement by the European Commissioner, and I can't say how grateful we are. Will add another 15 megawatts to that. Will increase another 50% to that target, and enable us to generate most of the power needed for the city of Goma. What does that mean? What does that mean in terms of what we were saying earlier, what Ben was explaining, and so on? Well, what we've established is that every megawatt of electricity that's generated by the park will create between 800 and 1,000 jobs in local businesses, new businesses that are created because there's energy available. The most interesting aspect of that is that 11% of those jobs are young Congolese men and women who have left the armed groups to take on gainful employment, to support their families, to support the community. And that's really what we would define as empowerment, is that choice to be able to walk away from the economy of war and the economy of violence towards a sustainable economy that enables a young generation of people from North Kivu to rebuild their country. And so what we have now is a series of networks driven by the national park that pump 30 megawatts of electricity. There are about 1,200 businesses connected to that, as well as 20,000 homes, to this clean energy source that's generating 12,000 jobs. And so that's really the main satisfaction that we get from managing the national park, far beyond this satisfaction of seeing this extraordinary wildlife. It's the contribution that it makes to a new economy and a new Congo in the east. Of course, it's extremely important to also talk about this whole issue of empowerment with respect to commodities. And Ben's efforts, the Eastern Congo Initiative's efforts, have focused a lot on cocoa, cacao, coffee, and other commodities. What we're finding now, for instance, in the north of Virunga, is that it's the illegal exportation of cocoa through smuggling networks that's the main source of revenue for illegal armed groups. And by creating these new markets, an effort that ECI spearheaded as far back as 10 years ago, and that we've adopted subsequently, is really one of the deep systemic solutions to resolving the issues of the armed groups, the militias that are at the source of this extraordinary violence in Eastern Congo, and providing an economic, peaceful solution to situations of armed conflict. And so that's really where we lie today, is both with respect to ECI's efforts and ICCN, the Congolese National Parks Authority, partnered by the European Union, is in having built these substantive programs whose importance lies in these young Congolese men and women who are developing these thousands of small businesses and regaining control of their own resources as an alternative to violence. So we're incredibly excited about that. We think it really is the future Eastern Congo. It's also an example of what can be achieved. And of course, if it can be achieved in that context, it can be achieved anywhere. And that's really the lesson for the rest of the world, is that it is possible to create a clean, peaceful, green economy that drives benefits and wealth for the poorest and most vulnerable in society. Thank you.
No, thank you. That was fascinating. Three amazing talks. I'm sure you're all aware of each other and you know of each other's work. Is there any point that any of you would like to pick up on what you've heard so far? So Commissioner, go ahead.
Okay, sorry. First of all, thanks for very, very impressive interventions. And Ben, I want to say to you that thanks for sharing your story. I think it was very impressive, and I think it also proves that one person can really make a difference. And I wanted to comment when you say that, or said that you see that we need to work with the local communities and local people with the respectful way. And I fully agree with you. I think that's the only way to succeed, that we need to work with the local people. And I think there is also a link to the security aspect. Actually, all of you referred to that there is no peace without development. So if we want to sustain security, if we want to have a sustainable and stable Virunga Park in the future, we also need to invest in human development and access to education, access to job, and create people hope and opportunities. And I think that's why I'm personally so committed to this approach, because I think that what we as the European Union, we really try to do in that region is to have this kind of a comprehensive approach, where of course biodiversity, nature is very strongly a part of that approach. But at the same time, we also want to provide opportunities, education, job creation, and so forth for the people, so that they really see that this green transition or green economy is not a threat, it's an opportunity. So really we are on the same page, and thanks for these very, very impressive interventions.
Okay, well, what I'd like to do now is to get each of you to talk very briefly, for under 2 minutes, if you wouldn't mind, about your vision for the Eastern Congo. And Madam Vice Prime Minister, if it's okay, would you mind starting us off with a vision for this region?
Pourriez-vous commencer?
Oui, bien sûr, merci beaucoup. Je voudrais d'abord commencer par saluer les interventions des uns et des autres. J'ai apprécié, je crois que nous avons la même vision de dire nous protégeons les aires protégées, c'est vrai. Nous protégeons la biodiversité, c'est vrai. Nous devons tenir compte aussi de la population humaine qui y a habité et qui est encore, même à l'intérieur et dans les alentours de ces aires protégées. Et pourquoi nous devons protéger aussi cette population et quelle manière nous devons la protéger? C'est ça, en fait, la vision de la République démocratique du Congo. Protéger la population, qu'elle soit là pour qu'elle, à son tour, comprenne à travers la sensibilisation, la conscientisation, que c'est de leur intérêt. On n'a pas ravi les richesses des Congolais qui habitent aux alentours ou qui vivent dans les parcs. Les richesses leur appartiennent. Mais les apports au niveau tant national qu'international, c'est justement pour valoriser leurs propres richesses, pour préserver ces richesses en vue des générations futures. Donc la vision, c'est de se focaliser sur la conscientisation, l'éducation de la population environnante. Parce que justement, cette population-là constitue aussi une ressource humaine par excellence pour le travail au niveau de parcs. Parce qu'on va protéger les animaux, on va protéger la biodiversité. Ce ne sont pas ces animaux qui vont se protéger eux-mêmes. Donc, on a besoin des humains pour devoir les protéger. Deuxièmement, la vision, c'est de pacifier totalement les milieux des aires protégées. Lorsqu'on parle d'une aire protégée comme étant un environnement international, un environnement protégé par l'UNESCO, donc ça doit vraiment être un lieu de paix. Lorsqu'on parle d'impact vert, lorsqu'on parle d'un espace vert, la verdure non seulement de ce que nous voyons, mais la verdure aussi en termes de paix. Pour le moment, nous avons un défi, un grand défi à relever au niveau des parcs de Virunga, ce sont les fauteurs de troubles. Parce que ceux qui se trouvent pour créer les désordres, ils ne viennent pas pour donner la paix, ils viennent juste pour exploiter et partir. Par contre, les partenaires européens que vous êtes et nous-mêmes qui y habitons autour, nous sommes là pour préserver ces forêts. Donc, ce travail des communs accords, c'est en fait la vision conjointe des
but we're going to have to bring this to an end very quickly. If I could go to you, Emmanuel, next for your vision for the future, and if you could keep it to about a minute, that would be a minute or so. That would be great.
Okay, well, I could talk for a very long time, but if I must be succinct, I would say, really it's about employment for the young and quality employment. I think that's really certainly the lesson that we learned from ECI. It's certainly the lesson that we learned, as has been said so effectively, the lesson that we learned when we listen to people in Eastern Congo. It's the issue of creating quality employment. If we're able to do that on a large scale, be it through strengthening local businesses and creating new businesses, or through farmer livelihoods, as ECI has done so effectively, and that we're beginning to work on together, then people choose a better option to the trafficking economy, the economy of violence. Young men and women in Congo don't wish to join the armed groups. They do it out of desperation. And it's for lack of alternatives that, this terrible situation exists. And that really does take a long-term vision. It took us a while to really fully understand what that meant. Right. But I think, now with the help of so many, it's beginning to materialize. And so that's something that we're, like I said, we're incredibly excited about.
Emmanuel Demerode, Director of the Virunga National Park. Thank you for that. Ben Affleck, if you could give us, if you could pot your vision for the region into a minute, that would be wonderful.
I've never been accused of being succinct, but I will do my very best. And I apologize for going on. At first, I want to say again, it really is that I never imagined I would have the kind of honor to be in the same, share a screen with an extraordinary and dedicated man like Emmanuel, who modesty forbids. I'm sure from mentioning he himself survived an assassination attempt. Not only that, it is, as he said, the Congolese who bear the brunt of this violence. They are Congolese rangers at the Virunga Park. Hundreds of whom have died selflessly, sacrificing themselves to protect the park, the local economy, and the local population. I believe, again, as Emmanuel said, that people are basically good. The Congolese are no different from anyone else. They want to be happy. They want to provide for their families. They seek employment. They seek a life of which they can be proud and that has integrity. The role of the international community of philanthropists, I think, at this time, as again Emmanuel pointed out, as the Deputy Prime Minister pointed out so clearly, is at this time, I think, best performed by trying to help and foster opportunities other than participating in furthering the tragedy and violence. And that means coffee, it means cocoa, it means power, and doing things on the scale that Emmanuel is doing. And I also want to mention, as a final note, that the local population does not have the ability to monitor or to enforce or to examine the way in which the extraordinary natural resources over which these wars have been fought that exist in Congo are extracted from Congo, the contracts that are made regarding who extracts them, and the fairness with which the wealth derived from tantalum, tin, gold, copper, timber, and so on is received by the local population. It's the international community's responsibility to make sure that they are not participating in activities which do not, which exploit the Congolese people and their minerals and their natural resources. And I'm sorry I'm going over, but yes, frankly, I think that's extraordinarily important to say.
Ben Affleck from the Eastern Congo Initiative, thank you so much. And I wonder, Commissioner Upalainen, if I could ask you to bring proceedings to a close and share your brief concluding remarks.
My vision for Virunga Park is that I really see that that's an extraordinary place where people and nature are able to live in peace. And I can assure you that the European Union is very committed to support the Virunga Alliance, and we will definitely provide financial support, like I announced today, but also in the future to that approach. So thank you very much from my side, and looking forward to continue this excellent work together.
Thank you so much. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Au revoir. Merci.